Welcome to Black Man Folktales. Kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe. He pretended to be rich to win me over. Mimi was 26, a young Nigerian woman whose presence was like a magnet that pulled people's eyes without her even trying. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. Her life, though not perfect, was admirable in every sense. Having graduated with a degree in mass communication, she had landed a solid position at a leading media company in Lagos, where her intelligence and poise quickly earned her respect. She wasn't from a poor home, nor was she born into excess wealth, but she had built for herself a lifestyle that reflected comfort and ambition. She had her own apartment, dressed with an enviable sense of class, and moved within circles where people admired her beauty and intelligence in equal measure. Her friends often teased her about her standards, saying things like, "Mimi, you're looking for a man who's rich, handsome, kind, intelligent, and faithful. Sister, no heaven husband you dey wait for, not Lagos man." But Mimi would laugh and brush them off, saying she didn't need perfection, only honesty and love. Still, deep inside, she craved a love story worth telling, one that would sweep her off her feet, challenge her mind, and secure her heart. On that fateful Saturday evening, Mimi and her friends decided to attend an art gallery opening, one of those glamorous events where Lagos's elite gather to sip wine, discuss culture, and show off their wealth. Mimi wasn't going to meet anyone in particular, she simply loved the arts. Yet little did she know that her world was about to be shaken in ways she could never have imagined. Stanley, in sharp contrast, was a man standing at the edge of frustration. He had graduated 2 years ago, full of hope and dreams, but life had dealt him a cruel hand. Job interviews had become a string of disappointments, his inbox a graveyard of rejection letters. To survive, he took menial jobs, hauling goods in markets, washing cars, running errands for people who barely respected him, anything to keep food on his table. Yet through all this, his pride as a man and his yearning for love remained alive. He had seen Mimi before, radiant, sophisticated, unreachable, and he had fallen for her silently. She embodied everything he desired and everything he thought he could never have. But Stanley had a stubborn heart. He believed, somehow, that if he could only stand in front of her, talk to her, let her see his heart, she might look past his struggles. But how could he approach a woman like Mimi when he could barely afford to feed himself? That question gnawed at him until one day he heard that Mimi and her friends would be attending a gallery event. Something sparked inside him, a daring, reckless idea. He went to his friend, one who was well off, and borrowed clothes, a designer watch, polished shoes, and even his sleek black hair. He rehearsed how he would walk, how he would speak, how he would carry himself. For one night, he would not be Stanley the struggler. He would be Stanley the gentleman, rich, polished, confident. As he stood in front of the mirror that evening, adjusting his borrowed blazer, he whispered to himself, "This is my chance. This is the night I step into her world." The gallery was buzzing with life when Mimi and her friends arrived. The walls were adorned with bold strokes of Nigerian art, the kind that told stories of history and resilience. Gentle classical music hummed in the background as people clinked glasses of champagne and moved in small, elegant groups. Mimi looked stunning in a deep blue dress that hugged her figure, her hair falling in waves that caught the light as she moved. Stanley spotted her almost immediately, and for a moment, he froze. She was even more beautiful up close than she had been in his imagination. His heart pounded like a drum, but he steadied himself, adjusting his borrowed cufflinks before walking over. When he greeted her, his voice carried confidence he barely felt inside. Mimi turned to him, her eyes scanning his appearance, and for a second, she was caught off guard. There was something magnetic about him, tall, well-dressed, composed, and yet his smile carried warmth that disarmed her. They began to talk, and the conversation flowed so naturally it surprised them both. Stanley spoke about art, about life, about dreams, weaving words with ease, careful not to reveal too much of the truth about himself. Mimi laughed at his jokes, her eyes lighting up in ways that made his heart ache. By the end of the evening, she found herself giving him her number, something she rarely did. As they parted, Mimi felt a strange excitement, as though she had just met someone different, someone who could be important. Stanley, on the other hand, drove home in the borrowed car with trembling hands, torn between guilt and joy. He had won the first battle, he had her attention. But deep inside, a storm brewed, because he knew this was only the beginning of a dangerous game of pretense. The days that followed their meeting at the gallery were nothing short of magical for Mimi. She had met men before, men who flaunted their wealth arrogantly, men who showered her with attention but lacked depth, and men who thought their money was enough to keep her interested. But Stanley was different. He seemed confident without being cocky, attentive without being suffocating, and his conversations carried a depth that was rare. Their first date was in a quiet, upscale restaurant, one that Stanley had chosen carefully, knowing Mimi would expect a man like him to prefer such places. The truth, however, was more complicated. Stanley had spent the entire week working long hours at construction sites and running errands, scraping together every naira he could to make that one date possible. As he watched Mimi laugh across the table, sipping wine gracefully, he felt torn between two worlds, the harsh reality of his poverty and the fantasy of wealth he had created for her. Mimi, for her part, felt something stirring inside her. Stanley was attentive to her words, listened to her dreams, and encouraged her ambitions in ways no one else had before. He told her stories about his plans for the future, painting pictures of the life he intended to build. Every word from him sounded like hope, and Mimi found herself falling, slowly but surely, into a love she had always longed for. As their relationship blossomed, Mimi's friends began to grow wary. They noticed things that Mimi, blinded by affection, chose to overlook. Stanley never invited Mimi to his home. He always picked her up in the same borrowed car but was strangely evasive about where he lived. Whenever questions about his family or job came up, he danced around the answers with charm and quick wit. "Mimi, open your eyes," her best friend Amoka warned one evening as they sat sipping cocktails. "This guy is too polished, too careful. He's hiding something." But Mimi, smiling and lost in her feelings, dismissed their concerns. "Not every man is hiding something, Amoka. Stanley is different. He makes me feel seen, like I'm more than just beauty or money. He respects me. That's enough." Her words silenced her friends, but in truth, Mimi had moments of doubt too. Later at night, she wondered why Stanley avoided certain questions, why he seemed guarded despite their growing closeness. Meanwhile, Stanley's guilt festered like an open wound. Every time Mimi looked at him with those trusting eyes, he felt like a thief stealing her love under false pretenses. Yet the fear of losing her was stronger than his guilt. He convinced himself he needed just a little more time, that soon he would land a job, that soon the lies would no longer matter because he would make the truth match the illusion. Until then, he would keep up the act, no matter how much it tore him inside. For Mimi, the illusion was intoxicating. She found herself opening her heart to Stanley, telling him about her dreams of starting her own media agency someday, about her childhood, about the things she longed for in a partner. Stanley listened intently, hanging on every word, not because it was part of his act but because he genuinely cared. In those moments, his love for her was the only thing that felt real, even if everything else was a lie. He imagined a life with her, not built on borrowed cars and fake stories, but on truth, laughter, and shared struggles. Yet reality lurked in the shadows, threatening to shatter the fragile dream he had built. Mimi, swept away by the whirlwind of romance, ignored the unease that sometimes whispered in her heart. When she introduced Stanley to her friends in more formal settings, their skepticism deepened. "He's charming, yes, but too vague about important things," they whispered behind her back. Mimi fought for him, believing her love could silence their doubts. But deep inside, a storm was brewing, and both Mimi and Stanley were hurtling toward a truth that would not stay hidden forever. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Mimi's life took a turn she would never forget. She had been assigned by her office to conduct a community survey in one of the less affluent areas of Lagos. It was routine work, something she had done many times before. But as she walked through the bustling market, clipboard in hand, her eyes caught a figure she recognized, and her heart froze. There, among the sweating laborers hauling bags of rice and crates of tomatoes, was Stanley. He wore no polished shoes, no designer watch, no sleek car in sight. His clothes were worn, his hands rough, and his face glistened with sweat as he bent to lift heavy loads. For a moment, Mimi thought her eyes were deceiving her. She blinked, trying to reconcile the image before her with the man who had just taken her to dinner in a luxury restaurant days ago. But reality was cruel and clear. It was Stanley, the man she loved, the man she defended, the man she thought she knew. Shaken to her core, Mimi approached him, her heart pounding with a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. "Stanley," she called, her voice trembling. He turned, shock flooding his face as their eyes met. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the noise of the market. Stanley dropped the crate he was carrying, his shoulders slumping under the weight of exposure. Mimi's voice cracked as she asked, "What is this? Who are you, really?" Stanley's defenses crumbled instantly. Tears welled in his eyes as he tried to explain, stammering through his confession. He told her about his struggles, his endless job hunts, his shame, and his desperate need to win her love. "I thought if you saw me as I am, you would never give me a chance. I just wanted time, Mimi. Time to become the man you deserve." His words were soaked in pain, but to Mimi, they were knives cutting into her soul. Every date, every laugh, every tender moment replayed in her mind, now tainted by deception. She felt foolish, humiliated, and betrayed by the man she had opened her heart to. Tears streamed down Mimi's face as she shook her head, backing away from him. "You lied to me, Stanley. You didn't even give me the chance to love you for who you really are. You stole my trust." Stanley reached out, desperate, but Mimi pulled away. Around them, market-goers paused, sensing the drama unfolding, but for Mimi, the world had narrowed to the man before her and the shards of her broken heart. She turned and walked away, her chest aching with every step, while Stanley stood rooted, devastated, watching the woman he loved disappear from his life. That night, Mimi cried herself to sleep, her friends' warnings echoing in her ears. She hated him for his lies, yet she couldn't silence the memories of his kindness, his laughter, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. For Stanley, the breakup was a death sentence. He had lost the love of his life, not because he didn't love her enough, but because he hadn't believed in himself enough to show her the truth. In the weeks that followed, Mimi tried to bury herself in work, pretending she was fine. She smiled at the office, laughed with friends, and even posted cheerful pictures on social media. But beneath the mask, her heart was heavy. Nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in her mind. How could he deceive her so thoroughly? How could she have been so blind? And yet, why did her heart still ache for him? Her friends reminded her that she deserved better, that Stanley was nothing but a liar who had played on her emotions. Mimi nodded and agreed outwardly, but deep inside, she knew it wasn't so simple. Stanley may have lied about his wealth, but the way he looked at her, the way he listened, the way he cared, that had been real. And that truth made the betrayal hurt even more. Meanwhile, Stanley spiraled into despair. He could hardly eat, hardly sleep. The weight of losing Mimi pressed on him like a boulder. For weeks, he drifted in and out of jobs, his motivation shattered. But then, one evening, as he sat alone in his tiny room, something shifted in him. He realized he had two choices: drown in regret, or rise from it. And for Mimi's sake, he chose to rise. Stanley threw himself into the pursuit of work with a new fire. He applied for jobs with relentless determination, knocking on doors, attending interviews, refusing to give up despite rejection after rejection. He upgraded his skills, took short courses, and sought mentorship wherever he could. Every day he reminded himself of Mimi's face, her voice, her disappointment. "I will prove to her, and to myself, that I am more than my lies," he vowed. Months passed, and life tested Stanley again and again. But his persistence finally paid off. A recommendation from an old classmate opened a door, and after rounds of interviews, Stanley landed a managerial role in a reputable company. It wasn't just a job, it was a rebirth. For the first time in years, he felt proud of himself, not because of the title or the salary, but because he had fought his way here with honesty and grit. As he stood in his new office on the first day, looking out over the city, his mind drifted to Mimi. He knew finding her again wouldn't be easy. She might hate him still, might never forgive him. But he also knew that if love meant anything at all, it was worth fighting for. And this time, he would fight with the truth. It had been almost a year since Mimi last saw Stanley, and in that time, she had done her best to erase him from her mind. She had busied herself with work, climbed higher in her career, and even entertained a few suitors, though none seemed to touch her heart the way he once did. She told herself she was healed, that she had moved past the pain of his betrayal, yet deep down, the wound still ached whenever she thought of him. So when she unexpectedly saw him again one Sunday afternoon at a cafe, her world tilted. Stanley looked different, sharper, more confident, his suit tailored to fit, his presence commanding in a way she hadn't seen before. He approached her with a calm smile, and she felt her stomach twist with emotions she had thought buried. "Mimi," he said softly, as though the name itself was sacred. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The man who had lied to her, who had broken her trust, was standing before her transformed. She should have walked away, ignored him, kept her pride intact. But she didn't. She let him sit across from her, though her heart pounded with anger and old longing. Stanley wasted no time explaining himself. He told her about the year of struggle, the countless rejections, the moment he decided to change, and how hard he had worked to build himself back up. He told her about the new job, the stability he had finally achieved, and most importantly, that everything he had done since she left him was fueled by his love for her. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Mimi," he said, his voice trembling. "But I want you to know I'm not the same man who lied to you. This time, I come with nothing but truth." Mimi listened, her face calm but her heart in turmoil. Part of her wanted to believe him, to fall back into his arms and let love heal the cracks between them. But another part remembered the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of discovering his lies in the harsh light of that marketplace. "You don't get to walk back into my life as if nothing happened, Stanley," she replied coldly. "You broke me. You made me question my judgment, my trust. You don't know the nights I cried because of you." Stanley's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he nodded. I know. And that's why I won't give up until I've proven myself worthy of you again. Paragraph 3. Persistence meets a broken heart. Over the weeks that followed, Stanley kept showing up. He didn't overwhelm her with gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he offered his consistency, his honesty, his time. He called when he said he would. He listened when she spoke. He respected her boundaries and never demanded more than she was willing to give. Slowly, Mimi began to notice the difference. This wasn't the Stanley who had hidden behind illusions and borrowed clothes. This was a man who had been broken, rebuilt himself, and come back stronger. Still, she wrestled with her heart. Her friends warned her not to make the same mistake again, to remember the lies that had hurt her so deeply. But late at night, when she was alone, she thought about him, about his sincerity, his persistence, his unwavering love. It was a battle between pride and longing, between fear and hope. And though she resisted fiercely, the cracks in her walls grew wider each day. Deep down, she knew the truth, she still loved him. It was a rainy evening when Mimi finally allowed herself to stop running from her heart. She had spent weeks fighting Stanley's persistence, testing his patience, and doubting his sincerity, but somewhere along the line, her heart began to soften. When he called one evening and asked if he could see her, she agreed, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. They met at a quiet park, the drizzle soft against the night air, and for the first time in months, Mimi let down her guard. She told him how much he had hurt her, how deeply his lies had cut, how much she feared trusting him again. Stanley listened quietly, tears slipping down his face, then took her hands gently in his. I can't erase what I did, Mimi. I can't change the past. But I can promise you that from this moment on, you'll never have to question my honesty again. I love you. I always have. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me. His words broke through the last of her resistance, and for the first time in a long while, Mimi allowed herself to believe in him again. That night, under the soft glow of the park lights, they embraced, not as strangers, not as broken lovers, but as two people choosing to begin again. Their second chance was not easy, but it was real. Mimi held him accountable, reminding him that trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt slowly. Stanley, for his part, never wavered. He shared his struggles openly, his triumphs honestly, and made sure Mimi always knew she was part of his world. Gone were the days of pretenses and illusions, in their place stood transparency and mutual respect. They dreamed together, planned together, and supported each other's ambitions. Mimi's heart healed with each passing day, not because Stanley showered her with wealth, but because he showed her love rooted in truth. Her friends, once skeptical, began to notice the change in him too, and though they remained protective of her, even they could not deny the sincerity in Stanley's eyes. Slowly, the couple built not just a relationship, but a partnership grounded in resilience, forgiveness, and hope. One evening, after months of rekindled love, Stanley decided it was time to take the next step. He had planned it carefully, not with extravagance, but with meaning. He took Mimi back to the art gallery where they had first met, the place where their story had begun with lies but where he now wanted to rewrite the ending with truth. The gallery was quiet, reserved just for them, the paintings glowing softly under the lights. As Mimi admired the art, Stanley dropped to one knee, his hands trembling as he held out a ring. Mimi, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I came into your life with lies, but I stand before you now with nothing but truth. You are the love of my life, the reason I fought to become the man I am today. Will you marry me, not for the man I pretended to be, but for the man I truly am? Tears spilled down Mimi's cheeks as her heart swelled with love. She saw him, not the illusion, not the mistakes, but the man who had fought for her, who had grown for her, who had proven his love through resilience. With trembling lips, she whispered, "Yes." And in that moment, surrounded by art and truth, their love story came full circle. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.